Okay, we are now recording.
That's great. So, welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. My name is Kevin Streeter. I'm the chair of the BCS Learning Development Specialist Group. Just to let everybody know as you're joining that we are recording this session. So if you don't wish to be recorded, then please take the opportunity to drop off the session now. We will be making the recording available for the committee, for the specialist group through the SG website. Just a few slides to start off with, just to introduce the Learning Development Specialist Group. Go to the next slide. So the Learning Development Specialist Group within British Computer Society member groups that is particularly involved for those that are involved in development, delivery or management of learning to IT and communications professionals and users. The committee came up with this definition a couple of years ago, as we thought this really broadly describes the interests of the varied membership that we have in the specialist group. So hopefully tonight's webinar will be very relevant to all of these groups, and obviously we're primarily interested in the IT world, but everybody's welcome to this session.
Good.
And just a quick note about two really important future events we've got coming up. We have the Technical Training Manager book launch on April the 8th. And this is an event that we're running jointly with SEDMA Europe. This is the first book that the L&D specialist group has been involved in, particularly around management of training, so management of commercial training organisations. So if that's of interest to you, then please head over to the website and sign up for that event. And then just advance notice, 2nd of October, we're going to be running our first IT technical training conference, and it's going to be about improving competence in IT, so quite relevant for tonight. And final slide from me, really to give some background to everyone on the call. We did a survey of the membership of the specialist group, and this is the breakdown of the people that are part of this group. So 18% involved in end user IT's training, similarly about 18% involved in professional skills, so things like project management in IT, so prints, ITIL, technology, process and procedure training like that. About 16% involved in IT technical skills training, and 16% involved in university education. So pretty much all spheres of education covered across the membership. So hopefully you fit into one of those groups. And I thought, Don, that might be an interesting set of numbers for you. It's a wide range of learners from a wide range of backgrounds. So hopefully very relevant audience for what you're going to talk about tonight.
Well, so. I hope so. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm going to crack on if that's everything.
Over Brilliant. To you, Don. So,
thank you very much. Thank you. Always good to be here. Big fan of the BCS, and I know it's Kevin. You've done a great work, and the BCS does great work in supporting the IT profession. Well, in the UK and beyond, of course. I say IT. I'm never quite sure if it's IT or ICT, but I'm sure if I get it wrong, Kevin, you'll correct me. I'm going to crack on with my presentation. I'm hoping to bring you some value in the next 50 minutes. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and when I ask the questions, I'll be using the chat area here. So I'm just going to quickly post something into the chat area so you can see it. And if you can't see anything in the chat area, then I was going to say let me know. Of course you won't be able to, but I'm just typing hi everyone into the chat area, and if you can see that, great. When you send a message in chat, please could you make sure that you send it to everyone. There are people replying already. Fantastic. The idea of saying of sending it to everyone is that it's great to have a communication and chats between everyone I always believe that no one person in the room is smarter than all of us together, provided we work in a collegiate way and we share things. And so the idea is to use the chat as much as possible in order to share between ourselves. All right, so to let you know about myself before I crack on, and indeed ask you a question, I've been in this field for a long time. I started actually as a computer programmer in 1981, though. So that was the days when 150 megabyte drive was the size of 2 dinner plates, and having it meant you felt like you were a god of IT processing power. But of course, now the computers that I worked on in those days, PDP-11s, are in, well, actually, the National Museum of Computing, I believe it's called, and I was going there to show my kids around what the past of computing used to look like, and my own working history was there, which is always a bit chastening. Anyway, we move on. Been in the field for a long time. I have seen a lot of things change during those 35 plus years, as a computer guy to begin with, then as a trainer, and then as a person working in the field of digital and e-learning. Before I talk about what I've seen change and why I think the change that we're going through at the moment is so important and why we need to adjust to it, I'd really like to get your take on this and ask you, as your L&D professionals, as Kevin pointed out earlier on, what's your work like and how is it changing in L&D at the moment? If you could just type into the chat here and share it with everybody, and I'll give a shout out to people. Nice to see we've already, kia ora from New Zealand, Michelle. Lovely to have you with us. So if you could just type into the chat area, if you've got any thoughts about how your work in learning and development is showing, is changing, that'd be brilliant. So not sure. I'm a student. I originally worked in technical support, but now lighting, sound, and events. Okay, well, hopefully you'll see some of the things that are changing and the ways in which we need to change as we go forward as a profession. Michelle's saying we don't train the basics anymore, keyboard, mouse, etc. Well, Michelle, that's true. I remember back in the 90s training people how to use a mouse, and it was absolutely par for the course. Of course you had to do it. People didn't know how to use these things. Of course they all do now. Carol's saying L&D is being replaced by e-learning, and it's a fair point if you mean, of course, classroom training is being replaced by e-learning, but of course the role of learning and development is still required, even if we're using digital assets. But we have to evolve in what we do, Carol, and that's very much the focus of what I'm talking about today. Hunter, really good point. More consultancy and business partnering. There is, Hunter, and I believe there should be, and we'll dwell on that a bit later on. And Kevin saying lots more mobile, self-directed, absolutely. More focus on performance consulting versus one-off learning events, Robert. I would agree with you on that. Georgina, speed of emerging technologies, absolutely. Very rapid design, learner-centric, on-demand, multi-platform. Liv says L&D has a focus on performance improvement consulting. I'm a lecturer. Keeping up with what changes, the changes which employees want, is becoming more difficult. Bev, I'm not surprised. It is difficult. I'm not a great believer, by the way, in the idea that employers should drive the agenda entirely for what we teach, especially in further education and higher ed. But that's a different matter. What we've got there is a really good sample. Thank you everybody for your input on how our work in L&D is changing. And I can tell you, it's changed a lot for me. When I started in this game, I could tell you that, 26 years ago, 1993, I would have been at a factory in Greenwich in east of London, training people on how to use Excel 3. Yes, such a thing did exist, using an overhead projector and a lot of other equipment that the younger people on the call will have no idea what I'm talking about. But this is not actually a photograph of the factory, and I'll explain why when I get to the end of the presentation. But the thing is that the factory was a manufacturing base. They had an input gate and an output gate. Raw materials arrived, and out of the output gate came the goods. In this case, it was submarine cable for transmitting electronic messages. Very sophisticated, but that was their process, a traditional manufacturing process. And they treated people very much the same way. We didn't do our training in the nice swanky headquarters. We didn't do our training in the actual factory where things got made. We did our training in the slightly run-down building on the other side of the car park, which wasn't used for anything else. And that was regarded by the company as being very much like those in and out gates. People went in through one door. At the end of the day, they came out actually through the same door with their heads full of knowledge, ready to apply themselves to the workplace. Now, that's not quite how things work anymore. Both the factory model of training, that you put people on the production line, you fill them up and you put them out, put them back into work, doesn't work anymore. And I don't think people actually work that way anymore, but as much as they once did. But the key thing for us today is that the manner in which people learn and are expecting to learn in the workplace has changed. And along with it, we must change as well. So 3 things I want to look at today. How has work changed? How, therefore, must L&D change to be fit for the 21st century? And finally, how do we make the shift? And I'm not going to talk about this in general terms. I'm going to talk about it very specifically in terms of a tool which we've developed and have ready for use at the LPI, the Learning and Performance Institute, that I'm lucky enough to chair. And that tool is free for individual use, and I'll talk about that probably throughout the latter half of the presentation. So let's start with the first of these 3 things, 21st century work. What on earth does this actually mean? When we were producing the capability map, and I will tell you more about what that means in a minute, but it was a consultative process. We went out, we talked to people, we asked them, what is it that you're facing as challenges in the world of work? And they came up with a pretty revealing list of answers. The top of everybody's list was volatility and the speed of change, very much echoed in what Bev was saying, being a lecturer and finding it difficult to keep up with what employees want, and ditto industry disruption. Through all of these answers, you've got a couple of things which are common themes. One is technology, data analytics, digital transformation. Another is different ways of working, design thinking, agile. And of course, there's a third one, along with the technology, different ways of working. The thing that's driving it all is this idea of pace. And that really came through. Michelle was saying very rapid design. Liv was saying the speed of change means we need to be more flexible. So those 3 things, tech, speed, and new ways of working, absolutely were common themes in pretty much everyone we spoke to. And I will talk in a bit later on about the actual process we went to in producing the learning and producing the capability map. But it was a process that involved a lot of consultation. But again and again, these themes came through. And these aren't abstract things. In the UK, and I know we've got people from all over the world, which is great, but in the UK we have a couple of companies. Marks and Spencer's, traditional British company, 168 years old. Zara, actually a company based in northern Spain, started off very small, very different. Zara is expanding. It's had a record year of growth last year and the year before, and it is now pan-European provider of fast fashion. Marks and Spencer, huge company on the high street in the UK, has had to close down, I think it was 150 stores last year. And Archie Norman, the CEO of Marks and Spencer, said last year, we have no God-given right to be on the high street. We have to adapt ourselves. What's the difference? The difference is that Marks and Spencer's has a very, and by the way, I love Marks and Spencer's, don't get me wrong, but it has a very traditional approach to production, very much like the factory that we talked about earlier. It's got set processes for doing things and set ways of doing it, all of which take time. Zara, in contrast, has an agile approach to designing, producing, and distributing its fashion. It can turn around a fashion idea in 2 weeks. In fact, they've done it much faster than that, but 2 weeks is not an unusual time for them to do it. An idea comes through, people actually, they're looking at people on the street, they get an idea, they design something, they put it out to manufacture, it comes back. And very often that means it's local manufacture in Europe rather than putting it out to the Far East, just so they can get it out on the streets fast and sell it. And when it's sold, and then on to the next item. In contrast, Marks and Spencer's has 2 seasons per year. It's 2 ways of viewing the world. One is traditional process, one is agile, one is suffering, and the other is expanding. I think in the learning and development profession, which I'm in, which I love, which I support people in trying to develop themselves in, we have to ask ourselves, are we a Zara or a Marks and Spencer's? And we have to go where the action is. That means we've got to be a Zara. We have to become agile in the way that we haven't been in the past. Doesn't mean we have to throw everything away. Marks and Spencer's has some great values, some great processes, but we have to take that into the future with us as we become more agile. So let's talk very quickly about 21st century L&D, and I want to ask you another question here. It sounds a bit esoteric, a bit abstract, but I really want to just take a moment to ask you, what do you think is the role of learning and development? Go to as big a picture as you can. If you had to explain to somebody at a party, not in terms of training or in terms of designing stuff, but the big picture, what do we do in this profession? Let me know in the chat area. There's some nice answers coming through. So Robert says we help solve business problems, and Liv says enablement. I like that as a word, Liv. Enablement, supporting everyone to achieve. These are big picture ideas, and I like them. If there's any more in the room, please feel free to share them, and I'd like to put them out there. Hunter says we improve people and in turn business results. I don't think anybody's going to be very surprised when I come up with my own answer in a minute, but I'm going to echo what you guys are putting very well. Kevin says we help improve people's competence. Yes, I think there's two things there. It's about people, and also we help it, Kevin. I think you're right. We don't do all of it. That's very important. I like, and I've only got a phone number here, help make people understand and achieve the best. I love that as a something really aspirational. We want to help people get towards, but we're helping them get there. Me. I'm going to push on. So I want to distinguish between a role and an objective and a task. So when I talk about the role of L&D, I always am brought to mind of and I have some pools here because I'm brought to mind of the famous apocryphal tale of Christopher Wren walking through some pools, and he sees three masons at work. They're all carving a gargoyle or whatever they do. He says to the first one, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm carving a gargoyle." Says to the second one, "What are you doing?" He stops for a second and it says, "Oh, I'm making some money for my family, 2 shillings a week." And he says to the third one, "What are you doing?" And the guy doesn't look up. He says, I'm building a cathedral." So for him, his role was that really big picture thing that he's achieving. So for me, I can summarize what you've just said and my view of it, developed over the years, that we help individuals and organizations fulfill their potential. And I think that I put the emphasis on both of those because we do it by working with the individual, but we do that towards an organizational aim. That's why we balance them like that. So that's the big picture one. Underneath that, what are our objectives? The objectives. So you want to build the cathedral. That's fine. But what's your actual blueprint for making it happen? When you come to work in the morning, you can't just walk around with that big thing in your head. You're going to make people fulfill their potential. What do you do? I think L&D does 3 things. By the way, I don't think this has changed from when I was at school to when I was at work to where we are now. I don't think these objectives have changed either. 3 things. We build long-term capability, we enable short-term performance, and we create supporting foundations. So long-term capability, there's a lot of focus on the middle one of those, short-term performance. And that's important. We need to help people do their jobs better on a day-to-day basis. But you don't get engineers, you don't get systems architects, you don't get judges by a series of short-term performance enablements. Building up a large body of understanding and the practical application of it comes with a concerted program of long-term capability building. Actually, something the BCS has really focused on really well in supporting the profession in the past, nationally and internationally. And one of the great things the BCS did, of course, which Kevin and I were involved in the distant past, was making available the structure and supporting the building of Sophia, the skills framework for the information age. That is a classic example of the third thing here, creating supporting foundations. Tools, it could be intellectual property like Sophia, it could be a piece of technology, a learning management system. It could be something like helping people to learn well. That's all a foundational piece. I don't think these three things have changed either. But I do think that the third thing, the actual task you do, you're going from the blueprint down to, right, I need to get a door frame into this door. I need, a door into this door frame. I need to get some foundations down, whatever. That actual task, those series of tasks have changed. And when we go out and we talk to people at the LPI, these are the sorts of tasks that people are talking about. There's a lot of talk about culture. There's a lot of talk about, well, we had earlier performance consulting and performance support. A lot of talk about co-creation, working with people to design stuff rather than doing it all in L&D. Technology, of course, and curation, the idea that not everything, we don't have to create everything ourselves. We can use stuff that's available and recycle that to our team. So I'm trying to set the scene there, and I'm going to want to spend the next 30 minutes really, and then we can deal with some Q&A. And by the way, if you've got any questions, feel free to interrupt during the course of this. I'm absolutely happy to deal with them during the course, or I'll copy them and save them and use them at the end. I want to talk about this idea of how we make the shift from this old world where essentially we had two things that we did. We created content or we delivered it. And you could deliver it online, you can deliver it in the classroom, whatever. But those are the two parts, the creation of content and the delivery of it. That is very much, in my mind, the Marks and Spencer's mold. I'm not saying that we don't need in the future to create and deliver content. We still do. But just as Marks and Spencer's needs to adapt and bring itself into a more agile way of working and do more things, so do we. We're not going to be able to do these tasks with the old skills base. So what are the skills that we need in order to carry out these tasks in the future? And yes, the answer is there is a recording, and I'll make the slides available absolutely afterwards. Thank you for raising the point. Yep. And I'm sure the webinar is being recorded, so, well, it is being recorded, so yes, it will be available for download afterwards. And of course, if you ever want me to talk about this, this is my life's work. I'm not kidding. This, for me, is the most important thing I do of all the things I do. So if you ever want me, Don Taylor, to talk to any number of people about this, just hit me up. Contact details will be at the end. All right. Let's talk about this business of what exactly we mean when we're talking about skills, because I haven't really pinned it down so far, and I haven't been vague about it, but I've not been specific about it either. Let's talk about skills, roles, and positions. It's quite important because the way we work is changing, and in order to have a common language of skill to describe what we're doing, we need to be very clear what is a skill and what's a position and what's a role. There are roles that we can name that are sort of linked to those tasks we were talking about. You want to be a performance consultant or instructional designer, instructor, whatever. Those are linked to skills which very often have similar names or different names. These are names on the left-hand side here from the LPI Capability Map. Sometimes there's a one-to-one correlation. Well, your instructor, let's say it's a classroom instructor, your instructor has to be expert in facilitating face-to-face learning, fine. But maybe, as here, also your instructional designer, or there's a role of being an instructional designer, which has more than one skill associated with it. And that's quite common that you need to have more than one skill. But there are also positions, and typically we find that you can describe the positions, the jobs that people do, as being combinations of different roles. So you might say that an ID or an instructor, ID/instructor, has a combination of these two roles, which is a combination of all three of those skills. You might say you've got somebody who you call an L&D business partner, but other people would call a performance consultant. The reason I'm making this distinction is that very often when I talk to people about the capability map, which we're going to get to in a second, don't worry, but when I talk about the capability map, people often say, but Don, you're talking about, we have a list of 25 skills defined across 4 levels. and they describe the skills required in an L&D department of the 21st century. And people often say, but Don, I have to do all of those things. I am the L&D department. And that's the truth. The fact is that very often you've got somebody on the right-hand side with a position where they've got a whole combination of roles and a whole combination of skills that they have to handle. And I think we'll talk about that towards the end. What do we do when you're in that position? But very often you can bundle together things into role, and the role is the same as a position, but more often your positions are a combination of different roles. Okay, so let's look at some of those roles that we've got in L&D. And by the way, of course, we do have people coming to us in the institute saying, so what roles do I need for what roles do I need for my department? The answer is we don't know. We have to have a good long conversation and use a tool to tell you, because there is no one answer for what's right for your particular organization. Typical L&D roles today are those things on the left-hand side, which you'll be familiar with. The idea that you can be an instructional designer, e-learning developer, whatever, online instructor, classroom instructor. And as well as those roles, those don't go away. But in addition, there are new roles, emerging roles that we need to tackle to support if we're going to be a 21st century learning development department. Certainly performance consultant, we had a look at that earlier. There are phrases like learning experience designer, not quite sure necessarily how you define that and which skills go into it, but there's definitely a new type of role. A community facilitator is not a new role exactly. In fact, it's quite ancient, but it seems to have been rediscovered, and so on. So we have this combination of roles that we are looking to fill, or looking to have people tackle in order that we can do those tasks that enable us to meet our objective of helping individuals and organizations fulfill their potential. Against this background, the LPI said we need to produce a common language for skills for our industry, much in the same way as Sophia was introduced initially by the BCS and then as a group offering by a number of different bodies in the UK. And the language that we've come up with, the common language that we've come up with to describe the skills of the 21st century learning and development department is the LPI Capability Map. It has 25 skills over 4 levels, and I'll describe the levels to you in a few slides' time. And those 25 skills fall into 5 categories. The background to this very quickly is that we had 25, we launched this initially as 27 skills in 2012, and then we tested it out. We found that it was being very useful for people. About 3,500 people self-assessed for free against using the tool, and then in 2018 it became apparent that we really need to refresh it. And at that stage, we went out to the 3,500 people. We asked them what changes they thought should happen. We also put together a group of between 40 and 50 people. There was a steering group and a number of working groups underneath that. The steering group had, I think in total it was 20 people on it from 13 different time zones. In total, as I say, between 40 and 50 people from a wide range of countries, all contributing to our understanding in quite some detail of what the skills should be. And Kevin's asked this question: what were the biggest changes since the 2012 version? Almost everything got changed, actually, Kevin. I got rewritten in some way, or it got sort of dropped and something new came in its place. But the biggest change was the focus on the new categories of performance and, first of supporting learning. The idea that we are not there to drive people to learn, but to support them in that learning. much more emphasis on performance and impact, which of course is exactly what people were focusing on earlier on, and a greater level of interest in the strategy and operations. So those three categories really got a thorough going over, and the rest of them were tweaked, I think we could safely say. So in a nutshell,
So,
Kevin, go on, Kevin.
Would you say it's much more then about the impact of learning on the business and the impact of learning on the learner that's changed the most? It's like learning's being recognised more completely by the business now.
Well, bear in mind, this is the skill set that we want for the L&D department of the 21st century. Because we've written this language doesn't mean that the business is recognising the skills, the impact of learning. It means more that we recognise, and all those people we consulted with recognise, that we have to make the case, and the business demands that we make the case. So I'm not being too, it's not that I'm not being optimistic. I'm just trying to be realistic here. But the other side of it is, of course, I think in the makeup of it, we're trying to get away from the idea that L&D is the fount of all knowledge, which is where the supporting learning bit comes in, and that's all about helping people learn. If you remember those three things, long-term, short-term, and foundations, the supporting learning bit is very much about putting in place foundations to help people learn for themselves, and we didn't really have that before. Well, we did have it, but it was much lighter. So okay, so biggest change, yes, is about business focus, but in addition, it's also, I would say, business focus and stopping learning and development being a bottleneck, if that makes sense. We went through, we had 9 principles. I won't dwell on these, except for the one in the top left-hand corner. The 9 principles that we went through, that we used when we were producing the 25 skills. The most important one was that it had to be useful. And I've always said with a competency framework, it has to be complex enough to be useful and simple enough to be usable. I think Sophia is a fantastic example of that. I have seen countless competency frameworks that are too complex to be useful because somebody's made the thing hugely, perhaps academically rigorous, perhaps they've just got overexcited about including a lot of definitions, but ultimately it's something that they can't use. So for us, it was really important that you could look at this on almost on one page piece of A3 and say, I get that and I can put it to work. That was a strong driver for us. I'm not going to go into the rest of these. I want to get onto the gist of it. So in putting it together, we were trying to produce this language of skills for the 21st century learning development department. Bearing in mind that, of course, for each organization, the profile of the skills it needs across all its people will be different. At the Institute, we're dealing with some organizations that have departments of 200, 300 people in learning and development. They're big, they are typically very dispersed, and they're very often very strong. They have a strong compliance requirement in their learning and development. They're very different from, let's say, a smaller organization in one place that doesn't have any compliance at all. The culture of the organization will affect it as well. Also, other things like how people make decisions and how people work. If you've got a company that's working 24/7 and has shift patterns, that is going to affect the skills that the L&D department needs as opposed to a regular 9-to-5 working environment. So I'm just trying to reiterate the point there that there isn't one solution for everybody. There are different solutions for us all, depending on the exact nature. Sorry, by the way, I should point out that if you want to download if you want to go, not download it, but if you want to go and learn more about the capability map, you can do so using the URL. I'm just going to put in there, it's a bit.ly URL there. Okay. So we have these 25 skills. If you're familiar with competency frameworks, you'll know that they need to be spread over skill levels, and we have these 4 skill levels: foundational, proficient, advanced, and strategic, where we ask people to assess themselves against, and of course they're numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. What I want to do is now is get into the fundamentals of what it looks like when you're using it, and then talk about how you can use it yourself. And you don't need to come to the Institute to make it work, but of course we can help you get the most out of the capability map. The first thing is, if you go to that URL that I pasted into the GoToMeeting chat box, you'll discover that there's a pretty comprehensive PDF guide. I think it's about 40 pages long, that gives some background to it. You can see the 9 principles there. You can see the aims of the organization, sorry, the aims of the sorry, not the aims, the names of the level there, and so on. And each skill is described in some detail in the document. Also, and this is where things start to get interesting, we have, as I alluded to earlier, a free online tool that enables you to go and assess yourself against the capability map for free, and then to generate a PDF of your results. So what I want to do is just take you through that so you can see what it looks like. Sorry, I appear to be unable to use a mouse. There we go. Okay, so the first thing is, if you go through to that URL and you decide to assess yourself, then you'll find yourself on a screen that looks very much like this. It's pretty simple. It's made possible by our partners Lexonis, who are, I think I can say this, the world leaders. Yeah, I think I can say the world leaders in competency software. I've known the guys for a number of years, well, a couple of decades, and they are incredibly proficient with this stuff. So what happened?
Leaders, Don.
Kevin, go ahead.
I think you can safely say world leaders.
Okay, good. I'm always a bit cautious when I say anything that's a superlative like that. But thank you. I'll pass that on to Andy, and I'm sure he'll be delighted that it's not just me saying it. So there's a very simple list. As I say, we want clarity and usability. So we have a list of the skills here under each of those categories. And if you want to, you can see here that I've assessed myself against level 3 for strategy, 4 for marketing communications, only 1 for developing L&D capability, and so on. If I hover over one of these cells, as you might expect, you get the list of the observable behaviors that you manifest when you are showing curation at level 3. And it's very important that we're talking about observable behaviors here. We're not talking about knowledge or understanding or experience. We're just talking about what can we see people do. That's very important, so that you can go and check that people are actually able to do these things. Top right hand corner, you'll see there's also this business of being able to download your competency profile report. And if you click on the skill, then you drill down, you can see all of the levels for that skill in some detail. And this is it's a very clean, very simple interface, and there will be other things that we'll build into it, which we haven't got there at the moment. As I said, you can download your PDF report of what your skills are, and it looks like this. And for members of the Institute, sorry, let me just go back to that for a second. The reason we do this is that it's incredibly useful for people, we found, to download this and keep it for a review of themselves and working with their managers, if they're in teams, to explore their personal development plans, and whether that's for themselves or as part of a team. I regularly travel, and this is conversations I've had in Singapore and in Florida, where I've been talking about this, and people come up to me and say, "Thank you so much for this. I regularly do it myself, or I get my team to do it, and we're all developing ourselves in accordance with the capability map." And we, at the Institute, we don't know who these people are, but they're going up and using it, and we're all in favour of that. If you're a member of the Institute, you also get to download the benchmark, where your rating is there, how you've scored yourself, and that is then assessed against the average for the industry as a whole. So how has everybody else who's been through it, which is something like 800 people now, how do they rate themselves, and how do you score against that? Now, it's also possible for us to do spider diagrams for how people measure up against those skills, that's a second level of use of the data. So I just want to go back through this. This is free to everybody. This is free to people who are members of the Institute. If you work with us, we will work with you to understand the particular needs of a team, in particular to understand where you want to be going with your skills for your team, what jobs you see people doing in the future, and once we've got that information, we can do things like spider diagrams that show where individuals are on track or off track. So Wendy Hayer here, you can see that she's the orange band here is the individual score. She's not really up to being a consultant because her score is much less than what's required to be a consultant. And content design, she's only actually short on a couple of skills here. Well, actually, no, sorry, she's in excess of it in one skill. Sorry, question here is members of the Learning and Performance Institute is the answer to that question. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. Okay, just so everyone can see it. There we go. And you can see that, anyway, I think you're smart people, you know what a spider diagram looks like, so we can see what the gaps are and we can arrange, and with them we can discuss ways in which somebody could fill those gaps. The ultimate aim, of course, is to, not the ultimate aim, sorry, one thing that is possible to do if you're working with the Institute is to do things like understand the current state of the team. So where is the heat map of skills? And you can see here, you've got a team that is quite strong. If you look at this row here, quite strong on creating and managing content and quite strong on designing and developing solutions. Compare that with what we call the generic state, which is the state which we might want to get to if all of the jobs were filled to the level suggested by the job profiles which we can work on together. And then we could provide a planned future state and say, well, okay, where do we need to go next? Bear in mind that very often what will happen is you'll have areas of strength, like in creating and managing content here, which is strongly represented, which is what you expect, and ditto to designing, developing solutions. That's normal for a modern for an L&D department, along with face-to-face learning being strong, because those are things we're traditionally strong at. And in the generic, what we call the generic state, which is if everybody had the minimum level of skill they require for the jobs you want to have, you'll notice that actually the current skill level is far in excess of that. So what we do is then build a planned future state which sort of meshes those two together and says, right, we're very happy with the skill level we've got with creating and managing content, but in other areas, we recognize that we do need to develop skills. Just one small example right at the bottom there, supporting and working teams is, we've got 3 people at level 3, but not enough people at level 2. And so we can see that probably we'll go for the generic state and work on ways to develop people from this position on the left to the position in the middle. So it's straightforwardly a way of saying we have the tools to help understand where we are and where you want to get to. But the where you want to get to piece is never something that just happens at the click of a button by churning numbers out of a machine. What I've dealt with here very quickly in the background to this, why it's important, and then looking at how we go ahead and produce some of those reports we've just seen, are 2 things. It's the data collection piece and the skills reporting, and that's fine. But in working together on understanding how your team should be for delivering the L&D that's required for the 21st century, there are actually 5 steps that we need to go through. There's the business of initial discovery, then data collection and skills reporting, then the analysis piece, and finally, strategic advice and the action plan. This is at a very superficial level, some of the things which we will do, which we would do as an institute working with you to help understand what your skills are, or of course, which if you wanted to do this yourselves, you would need to do. Yes, when you do the data collection, you need to brief your team beforehand to make sure that people are understanding what they need to do and doing their skills assessment all in the same way. And of course, people need to complete it effectively. And you'll need to find some way of producing a skills report. But in addition, probably what the most important piece is this piece right at the beginning of the discovery. We've been doing some engagements with organizations working on the understanding the skills of organizations using the capability map. And it's the discovery piece, which, you know, if you've done any of this work in the past or any sort of change management in the past, you won't be surprised to find is the most important bit, is understanding where do you want to get to, what's the strategic direction, and what are your priorities in order to get there. Those are the two conversations which we find ourselves having over and over again with organizations. Out of that, if you know where you want to get to, then this business in the middle tells you where you are, and then the analysis piece will then say, from where we want to get to, from where we are to where we want to get to, we can get the insights to actually provide this last bit, which is our plan. I'm going to wrap up because I think we probably want to get to doing some Q&A. You remember at the beginning I said this is the factory. We've been adopting more as a factory model of learning and development in the past, and we've been pushing people through because that was it was the only mechanism we had actually was pushing people through a process. But I also said that this factory doesn't exist anymore. And the reason it doesn't exist anymore is because the company that I was doing the XL3 training for weren't stupid. This was prime real estate on the River Thames, and they didn't need to produce their goods there. This is what it looks like now. They've knocked it down, they've sold it, they've made a tidy profit, and they've now got a bunch of flats on the, well, they haven't got it, a property developers put a bunch of flats up on this area on the River Thames. I think if a company is this old, this company, by the way, started working in 1850 and can adjust itself, I think we can adjust ourselves as well and make sure that we're not just fit for the 21st century, but able to really deliver what organizations need and lead in the 21st century. So that's me done. I've sort of talked around this quite a lot, and I hope I've shown some specifics which are useful, but I'm totally ready for any questions you've got now in the last 10 minutes of us being together. And as I said earlier, the URL for going to find out more about the capability map is there. I appear to have been thrown out. I don't. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the URL for the capability map. And if you want to stay in touch, ask more questions about it offline, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter via those. Basically, if you search for Donald H. Taylor, you'll find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. How does one join the LPI? It's a very good question. The short answer is if you go to the website, I'll just get that up, learningandperformanceinstitute.com. If you go to the website, you'll go through it. It's not terribly complicated, I have to say. We're quite keen to have members, so please do join up. Hello, yes.
Hi, Don. It's Kelly.
Kelly, go ahead.
At the LPI. Yes, I was just going to say, but I think Michelle and Kevin are potentially going to share my contact details. So if anybody's got inquiries about things like membership, then I'm happy to field those, and you can always share a link to your LinkedIn profile or CV, and we can look at that and grade that as well if that's useful.
Thank you, Kelly. Very helpful.
And I just want to add, a number of us are members of both. So Michelle and myself are both members of LPI and BCS. It's very complementary. So strongly encourage it as well, because fits well for those of us in the IT world to get some depth on the learning side as well from the LPI. So I know it's quite a benefit being a member of both organisations.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. And Robert asked, do we work with the Institute for Performance and Learning in Canada? Not at the moment, Robert. I know it's peculiar. I don't know who got the name first. We may well work with them in the future, and we certainly believe in collaborating as much as possible with other organisations. Mitty, kia ora to you in New Zealand. Delighted that you found a good way to kick off the day.
And actually, they did join us for the Learning Live conference in September, the I4PL. So I know that we are in conversation with them at the moment about collaboration.
That's brilliant. Good.
I just want to kick off the Q&A then, Dom. Just one question that comes up from my background in the Sophia world, which is we've got a nice capability map. How can the Institute help people develop from one level to the next? Where's the best source for guidance when you're trying to develop a skill? Because it's great identifying where your skills are, but obviously the benefit really comes from learning how to move from one skill level to the next.
The short answer is that you can tell by my hesitation I've got an answer that I can't quite give you, which is that there will be stuff announced about this in the not too distant future. So I'm afraid the short answer is, would you mind awfully just waiting for a couple of months, and then we'll be able to let you know. Obviously, you're right, Kevin. That's what you want. You want to know where you are, where you want to get to, and how can you develop. Kelly, do you have anything else which you can add to that?
I think, at the moment, the work that the LPI has been doing, where we've been supporting organisations through the capability map, as Don mentioned earlier, requirements are going to differ from one organisation to the next. So it's very much about having those detailed conversations with the organisation to understand where they want to get to, and then kind of planning out that roadmap of how they're going to get there. Some of those things might be learning interventions that the LPI can support with, or other suggestions that we might make. So we're certainly doing that on a number of projects that we're working on at the moment, but I know there's more, the LPI has more planned in the not too distant future, which will, further help us in that space.
Well, I look forward to welcoming you both back for a future.
We have a question here. Where are you seeing the biggest gaps in capabilities for today's L&D organisations? It's a great question. The answer for me is in, when you say the greatest gaps, I think depends whether you mean the number of people or the range of the gap. But actually, for both of those, and I could back this up with numbers because I don't happen to have them in front of me, but I looked at the data before I came online. The biggest gaps are in marketing and communications, which sounds trivial perhaps, but actually, you know what? It's one of the most important skills for successful implementing change in your organization. That's one. Another one is project management. Because L&D typically do not have project management skills. And finally, the other one is something which we talked about right at the beginning of this conversation, which is performance consulting. Which goes slightly with marketing and communications, because a great deal of Marcoms is about actually listening to people, but performance consulting, of course, really goes into detail in it. And I think that those, if anybody was saying to me, where should I put my efforts in order to get myself developed for the future in L&D as a person, or indeed as a team leader, I'd say make sure you're strong in those three areas: performance consulting, Marcoms, and or project management. Kelly, you've been working with organizations quite a lot. Have you got any sense of any other areas where things are coming up which are hot?
I think those, I would agree, Don. Those are definitely, standing out as key areas. And I think, you know, the performance consulting role, business partnering role in particular, is really proving to be a critical skill for organisations that they are focusing on developing.
Yeah, and the reason being what Kevin mentioned, which is this business of understanding the needs of the business. We can't simply be producing people and hoping there's use for them. We have to be linked to it, and that's where the performance consulting piece comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm very impressed that anybody has stuck around. I appreciate if you're in New Zealand or Australia, it's just the beginning of the day. But, you know, in the UK, it's coming up to 8 o'clock. I'm very impressed that anybody has stuck around to the end of this webinar this evening. Kevin, are there any thoughts that you've got at the end here?
No, I think just to sum up on it, it's a fantastic piece of work. It's great that the LPI has been able to put this together, and I'm really looking forward to how we can work together and sort of introduce the Capability Map into the world of IT. It's common interest. It's of great value to all of us in the specialist group. We're all involved in learning. It just happens to be in one sector.
Yeah.
So very much look forward to working together further with you on this.
And ditto, Kevin. I believe that it's I believe that we've got natural allies together. We should be working together to raise the profile of learning development in our organisations and do our work as well as we can. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think just capability maps in general and competencies is many areas of IT have their specialist frameworks. So project management, security, service management. It's really nice that we've actually now got an in-depth framework for the learning development world that completely supports everything that's been done with Sophia at a high level, but really puts the detail onto what we all actually do day to day. So it's really nice to have that.
Very well expressed, Kevin. We'll get you to do the next webinar.
Yes, and we really appreciate you organising it as well and inviting us to do this today.
And yes, well, thank you very much, Donald. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. We will be posting the recording and also your slides, Donald, if that's okay. And it's available to everyone in the specialist group. But thank you, and hopefully we'll see as many of you as possible on the 8th of April for the launch event of the Technical Training Manager book.
Thank you.
That's next event coming up. Thank you very much, guys, and thank you for sticking around.
Thank you.
Enjoy your morning or your evening, depending on where you are in the world. Bye for now.
Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.